SaaSOps show. My name is Justine, and I'm the Director of SaaSOps and Corporate IT at BetterCloud. Have you ever worked on a project that was just, well, a dud? Do you have trouble convincing your users to adopt a standardized tool? On today's episode, we will be talking about using a user-centric problem-solving framework to help you be more successful. I am joined by my fearless co-host, Brian, and my good pal, Kevin.
Hello. I would be remiss, since currently we're filming in the month of June, if I didn't mention that it's also Pride Month. For those of you who aren't aware, Pride is celebrated during the month of June and is a celebration of all things LGBTQIA+. And I'm currently sporting some swag not courtesy of Apple, I bought it myself, but also Rainbow Mafia, which is BetterCloud's LGBTQIA+ employee resource group. Kevin is in our design team here. Kevin, could you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. My name is Kevin. I'm the director of the product design team here at BetterCloud. I've been based in Atlanta. I've been with BetterCloud for about 9 years now, so kind of a resident, just longtime member.
Wow. Just nine startup years it's like dog years.
It's been
like 86 years old.
Yeah, you're ready to retire.
One would think. Yeah, I'd like that. That'd be great.
What types of roles have you done during your time at BetterCloud?
Oh, good question. So when we first started the company, I wore many hats, from a product manager to a front-end engineer to a product designer, and now I lead a team of awesome designers who come in and put their heart and soul into designing software for our customers, and I'm really enjoying doing that.
Justine also tells me that you wanted to come on the show for a while to talk about this topic. Can you tell us what this topic is and more?
Would love to. So I wanted to come on and talk about this thing called design thinking, which is really this, it's this sort of solution-based approach to how people can solve problems. And it's really geared towards innovation and thinking about problems in a really human-centered way. And what it really boils down to is this very iterative process that designers use to really understand who our users are, challenge any assumptions we might have about what we're hearing, and really trying to come up with strategies or solutions that might not be instantly apparent with sort of what we're hearing. And you might be thinking, well, gee, Kevin, maybe this sounds like something just product designers want to use in their jobs, but I'm here to challenge that assumption. As I just mentioned, it's not exclusive to just designers. This is not a framework that only designers need to use. A lot of people in literature, art, music, science, engineering practice design thinking. Businesses like Apple, Google, Samsung, they all have design thinking practices in place, and it's taught around the world at universities like Stanford, Harvard, and MIT. So I'm here to talk about how design thinking can be used in IT to create successful solutions for your end users.
Yeah, that all sounds great, but how does that work in reality? Like, why should an IT person care about the user?
Wow, great question, Justine.
Just to be blunt, right?
Stupid users.
I care about all my users, but just so we could like break down the philosophy behind this.
Sure. At its core, design thinking really revolves around this deep interest in really understanding the people who we are trying to create solutions or provide a service for. It's one thing if we just sit in a room together and we brainstorm on a whiteboard what solutions and ideas we have to then force onto our end users, but we risk the chance of those not being successful and those not being adopted. With this framework, this allows us to observe our users and really develop an empathy for them. And it's really allows us to reframe the problem in a very human-centered way so that we can start brainstorming what ideas do we have for how we could solve that problem in a way that would benefit end users based on what we've been hearing. And it's a framework that really helps promote sort of ongoing experimentation, prototyping, testing, all in the hopes that the solutions we are creating are much more successful, adopted, and really delight the people who are using them.
So we don't just sit in a room and say, you're going to do this, this, and this, and take it or leave it.
No!
That's you could do that, but the odds that your solution is successful, well, you're not going to really know, right? You're not going to know how well that's going to be successful. It may not, and it may be. Design thinking really allows you to reduce a lot of the risk, I think, that is associated with just brainstorming in a room and sort of pushing solutions out to users, for sure. As designers, I will say, as designers, we often are designing solutions for things that we're not well versed in ourselves, and it takes us understanding how IT admins, for example, need to automate workflows for us to understand how to deliver and design an experience that fits their needs. We could sit in a room and talk about how we could do that, but I don't know that our solution would be really successful if we did.
So what are the different steps to this framework that one might go through?
Great. Well, first of all, I want to say design thinking is really best used when we need to tackle a problem that's not really well defined or even really well known. There's a lot of unknowns around that, and there's a lot of different. As an example, for the designers, like I said, if we got tasked recently with how do you solve or how do our customers visualize a complex business process using our workflows tool. That's a problem space that we really needed to break down to better understand how things work. So design thinking's got really 5 phases to how you kind of solve a problem. And I'm going to start talking about empathy is critical for design thinking. It's where everything starts. It's the first stage of this process. And the goal is really to gain this sort of empathetic understanding of the problem you're trying to solve by conducting research to really better understand who your users are, who is going to be using your ultimate solution. And there's a couple pieces to this, right? It involves talking to experts, getting out of our room on the whiteboard and going to talk to the people who actually are going to be using what we're trying to do. So we want to find out more about the problem by observing our users, engaging with them, empathizing with them to just better understand their experiences and their motivations. Now, I'll tee up a couple ways I like to gain empathy are: 1, observe users in their environment as they try and work through a problem. You can also interview them about the problem and try and understand things from their perspective. And you might also want to even just immerse yourself in their environment so that you can get this deeper understanding of those issues involved. For example, let's say in IT, if you're creating this onboarding experience for a new employee, have you gone through that process yourself to understand how that experience is working today? Have you walked in the shoes of your end user? That's going to give you more empathy to understand where there's opportunities in that experience for users. And it's really all about, creating a solution that feels human and set aside our own assumptions about the problem in order to just gain an insight into who our users are and what they need.
Yeah, I think the key about not letting your own assumptions take over is really important, because I think, I'm sure you have this with design. As IT people, we often take for granted what people might know or understand about a particular tool or feature that, maybe we use it every single day and we're used to it, and someone else might be utterly confused.
Yeah. It's like, how could you not know that all you had to do is this simple 15 key combination in order to clear this thing and try this thing? And why didn't you know that the 6 troubleshooting steps you tried before this were wrong? But it is really like what you mentioned about onboarding users. We talk to we both like we examine the process itself, what that's like, as we're talking about making changes to it. But we also talk to people who have recently completed it to get that fresh perspective, and it always brings something valuable back to us. Like there's always something that we haven't thought about, that we've overlooked, or just like even getting the feel for like what that person, our part of the onboarding process is just one part of it. So when you throw it in with all the other stuff, it's like, oh yeah, I guess I can understand how that would be kind of overwhelming for you, given that you just learned like 20 other things at the same time.
I've got a really good technique that I like to do to gain empathy when I'm interviewing users, which is trying to get them to tell me a story. I like to start all my interviews off with, tell me about a time. If I say, tell me about a time when you first joined a new company, it's going to force that user to give a real world example that impacted them and allow them to speak to something that they actually experienced. Should we move on to stage two of the design thinking process?
Tell us about stage two.
Great. So we've gone out, we've talked to some people, we've got some empathy, we feel their pain, we understand more about their problem from their perspective. But now it's time to put all that together and gather it in a way that's going to allow us just to make a lot more sense of what we've heard. And so the second part of the process is called define. And that's really where you're going to synthesize all your observations in order to define really what is the core problem you're going to need to be set out to solve. And the goal here is really to take all the research that you've been doing, all the interviews, your observations, your notes, and just boil them down to what are the main themes you're hearing from all the users you've talked to. And there's a wide range of activities you can perform to really synthesize your research into something meaningful. And bonus, it's pretty fun to do with a group. And one of the things I love about design thinking is it's very, very collaborative. It doesn't always need to be, but it's certainly more successful with more people you can get in the room kind of contributing to ideas. So I'll give you 3 of my favorite activities to do when you're defining a problem. One is creating something called an affinity map, which is just essentially taking these individual pieces of data and kind of clustering them into themes. And it's my favorite technique because it's interactive, easy to do in a group. You can use Miro as an online tool to do this, or you can get up on a whiteboard and have 100 Post-it notes that you're kind of clustering together. Similar to an affinity map is something called an empathy map. This is where you are taking what you've heard users say and you're categorizing them into what are they thinking, what are they seeing, what are they feeling, and what are they doing while they're kind of experiencing the problem. So as you think about an onboarding experience, there's a lot at play there for a user to be thinking, seeing, feeling, doing, why they're being onboarded. How could you take the research you're hearing, put them in those different buckets to kind of identify and empathize with what the user is specifically talking about. And finally, you can create something called a persona, which is just this fictional character kind of based on your research. And they help you better understand your users' needs, experience, behaviors, and goals. And especially for IT, I think if you're working with employees at your company, you're going to have a lot of people who have different needs, experience, behaviors, and goals about the solutions you guys are thinking about and the problems you're trying to solve. Personas are a great way to sort of categorize who those users are in big, broad buckets.
So I had a question about, when you were talking about surveying users and conducting user research, how do you talked about interviews. What is the mix of like qualitative and quantitative data that you get from this? Like, is it all just interviews and you're kind of writing down your notes, or are you also sending out surveys or getting like specific data points you can use for statistical reasons or anything like that?
Yeah, great question. Anytime you are doing research, you always want to try and marry quantitative with qualitative.
Marriage. Marriage is what brings us together today.
And I like to use qualitative data as a way to better just understand the why behind something, why people feel a certain way or what attitudes are there. You really use that to kind of unpack a lot of the common themes you're hearing. And then you use quantitative data to validate a lot of the assumptions you're hearing. So how many people feel this way across our broad user base? Let's take the problem we teed up in the design world around how do we design a solution that allows customers to better visualize complex business problems? I might first do some qualitative research to understand what is difficult about understanding complex business problems and visualizing that and for a workflow, and then send out a quantitative survey that basically just validates those assumptions that I've been hearing in my interviews. And together, you can use that data together to tell a story about how the people are sort of experiencing this problem overall and how widespread it is.
Do you do anything to avoid bias in those surveys or in the types of research? Like, I would imagine it could be easy to kind of ask leading questions. Is there kind of guidance on avoiding that type of thing?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. Leading questions are really, really tough. It's very easy to ask them. Typically, you want to
as I asked you a leading question.
That's right. That's right. I think using a framework like tell me about a time and then following up with why a lot, you kind of sound like almost like a little kid asking why. You want to keep things very open-ended because what you're trying to get at is you're trying to understand things from that person's point of view. So walking in with an open mind and asking them to tell you about a time when they experienced this problem is going to open up the conversation in a way that maybe you're not expecting, which is perfect. You don't want to walk in with the script. You want to walk in with understanding. You want to just understand things from their perspective and use that to ask clarifying questions as they start telling their story.
So you've surveyed people, you've talked to people, you've synthesized those results or that the information from those words from those interviews, and what's next?
Next comes my most favorite part of the design thinking process, which is the ideation process, right? You've got your problem well-defined, it's understood, you've empathized with your users, and now it's time to ideate on some solutions. And this part of the process really involves brainstorming. And you're really brainstorming as many ideas as you can. And you're really trying to either look for opportunities for innovation or just look for solutions that you may not have thought of had you not done any of the legwork up to this point. So again, kind of a common theme, I'll touch on some activities you can do to really explore the problem space. And a lot of this is really fun to do with your group, especially if you've got other stakeholders. It's good to bring them in and show your personas, show your research. And as a group, you might ideate together to see kind of what you can come up with. Gives a lot more opportunities for more ideas on the table. So one of the things I like to do, you can set up a meeting and open up a conversation with a, hey, how might we question, right? How might we make onboarding more enjoyable for our employees? Or how might we get people productive on day one of starting with our company, as an example? It's going to open up a lot of different topics and a lot of different ideas for how might you do something. It's also going to take off the table maybe limitations, maybe constraints. Those things are important, but during the ideation session, you really want to keep yourself pretty open to new ideas. There's also an exercise you can do in a group that's pretty fun called an 8x8 or some other similar type of thing, where basically everyone gets a piece of paper, a pen, put about 15 minutes on the clock, and ask people to brainstorm 8 ideas for how you solve a problem. You've already teed the problem up. You know what the problem is, and so now people are just going to brainstorm and ideate ideate on how to solve that problem. Then everyone presents their ideas, and you can use something like dot voting to determine the top 3 best options. The really most important thing to consider while brainstorming, and can be something difficult to start, but it's important to keep a very open mind and to never shut down an idea. You always want to follow up with a yes and, or ask clarifying questions. The goal of this is to explore the problem space and look for things you might not have thought of. And if you say no, you're going to lock that idea down and not be able to explore it to maybe its full potential. I like to perform multiple rounds of ideations, which allows me to really feel like I've explored the space and I've gotten a lot of variety of ideas out on the table.
What's next? Do we start to build something?
Yeah, next is something called prototyping. And you've got hopefully your ideation session has yielded a few ideas that seem worthy of being moved forward. And this is the time to see how well do those solutions actually work at solving the problem. So the goal of the prototype phase is to produce a very inexpensive, very scaled down version of what your solution might be, so that you can kind of put it in front of your users and gauge how well or how effective is that a solution at kind of solving its intended problem. Now, prototypes can be something as simple as drawings on a piece of paper that you are having someone just kind of talk through and walk through as you show different steps of that process. They can also be just slides in a presentation. Basically, what you need to do is just create something that really by the end just gives you confidence that the solution you have is going to give you an understanding about how users are going to behave, think, and feel when they're kind of interacting with that end process. Going back to an onboarding experience, you need to have all of it figured out and all of it designed and all of it complete before you go and do that validation phase. How could you stand up a really inexpensive, very pared down onboarding solution that hits at the problems that you heard and really allows you to understand how would a user feel, think, and behave when they're kind of going through this experience overall?
Do you have us put an actual employee or somebody through the actual onboarding process to see what it's like?
Yeah, great question. We try and prototype with our end users who are actually going to be using our tools. Our IT team knows this all too well, as they've used many a wireframe that the design team has put together. Ideally, you want to try and get as real world representation as you can about the people who are actually going to be using it, so that you feel really confident that that's the experience you're going to be delivering, and it's not someone who knows about onboarding but won't be going through that themselves, because then you might miss the mark and you might not really get a representation of the people who are actually going through that.
That makes sense. It's nice having you have your very own lab rats working with you, but in New York, rats have a lot of power, so it's great.
I will say, when it comes to having your very own lab rats, in my experience, our customers, our own IT team, they love walking through prototypes and seeing solutions that aren't even baked yet, because it allows them to give input and to give feedback and to feel like they're part of the process. This is a way that you can really start bringing your own end users to your solutions more into your process before you roll out a tool. You've got buy-in and you've got alignment from stakeholders that they were involved in the process. They had a chance to give feedback. You felt good about what you've heard. Maybe you've iterated on that a couple times, but yeah, always try and bring people in, and you'll find they're really receptive to it and often like being a part of that. And that really highlights, I think, what's core of design thinking, which is all about empathy and understanding your users, and really wanting to experience something from someone else's point of view, and seeing them use your solution and seeing them walk through that with the mind of, is it actually performing like we thought it would? Really highlights that, I think.
Are there any other steps that we haven't gotten to yet?
Oh yeah, perfect. That leads me to the last part about this, and there's actually, I would say, a sixth piece, but the last part about this is we've talked about your prototype. Well, now that you've got your prototype, it's time to test it. Testing your solutions is critical to knowing whether they're going to be successful or not. We've talked about this just a little bit. You basically want to see how well did what we come up with actually perform. Could our end users complete their tasks successfully? Were they successful? Did they have a good experience? Where were there gaps in what they went through? Where did they struggle a little bit? Where do we feel like we could maybe do better and iterate based on what we've seen, what we've heard? And it's really important to watch and observe that process, so you can hear users, you can see users experience it for themselves. One idea we like to do on design team is we like to have our users think out loud, and we remind that all the time, where as you're using something, think out loud about what you're doing and how you're feeling when you're using it. Again, kind of going back to what are you thinking, seeing, feeling, doing. You'll get a lot of insight from people as they either struggle with the tool or they're not sure where something is. If they keep quiet, you're not going to know where they're struggling and why. So getting them to think out loud is a good way to see what are they thinking as they're kind of walking through our solution?
That makes sense. It's a simple but effective step. It's funny though, because I think about when I've been interviewed by your team, and in fact, when I'm thinking out loud, I'm always like checking to see if I'm getting the right answer, even though there's not really, that's not the point of it. But I remember doing some testing with Julia, who's been on the show with us before, and I'm saying like, oh, I think I'm going to click over here because this, as if I'm going to get a gold star, and she's looking at me like completely blank face, like I'm not going to tell you the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And you learn a lot. You learn a lot from seeing people use your tools and use your software and use your solutions. You'll learn a ton about how well you worked through the stages. And design thinking isn't something that just, oh, well, we tested it and we stopped and we're good. Design thinking is very much about iteration and revisiting your assumptions, revisiting your problem space, revisiting your solutions, and iterating to keep constantly improving those things. So as with any good solution, you don't really know how well you solved your problem if you're not measuring your solutions. So look for ways to how you can measure your solutions. Going back to what we talked about before, once your solution's out in the wild, are you surveying users about the effectiveness of that solution, how well it met its intended goals? That's going to allow you to get data in, which may allow you to reevaluate what you've got and see, are there other opportunities for us to improve what we have?
I mean, I think that generally speaking, Brian and I probably think about projects in a very similar way, maybe without the formalization that this process has. But I think we like do a lot of this stuff already. But I mean, we can definitely fit in some other pieces more. I mean, we do test groups, we do pilot groups, but not sure we do enough of the user persona creation.
I think it's easy when you're working with a bunch of people that you're comfortable with. It's kind of easy to go through kind of rapid fire solutions and think that you're covering all the bases. But as we expand, as we get people with more diverse backgrounds and with different experiences, I think it's doubly important to make sure that we are putting like a rigorous way of how we do this into place, so that we're not overlooking either A, like what somebody's needs are that we haven't just accounted for by our assumptions, and B, like a great solution that we haven't thought of because it's just us, and it can involve everybody else.
Thank you, Kevin. We really appreciate you joining us today. I know I've had you on the schedule for a while. I'm glad we finally were able to make it happen.
Yeah, I liked being here. Thanks for having me on the SaaSOps show. Really appreciate this. Go forth and innovate.
Mm-hmm.
If you have, if users if anybody wants to talk to you, chat with you about design or design thinking, or even how we do things in our product, are you a part of our SaaSOps community?
I most certainly am. I am in the BetterIT Slack channel. I'm also in our SaaSOps community. And you can definitely send me a direct message for any questions about anything, BetterCloud related or design thinking related, anything.
Great. We'll put your personal handle and your cell phone number and address below. Well, thanks a lot for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for having me.
And then to our audience, obviously, please join us in the community if you haven't yet. That's SaaSOps.community for your ease of typing. If you have an interest in getting certified in BetterCloud, we do have a BetterCloud fundamentals course that you can take, and you can show it off on your LinkedIn. The link for that will be also provided. I think it's bettercloud.com/certification.
That sounds right.
I'm doing my best. Is there anything else we need to plug?
Come work for us. We're hiring. bettercloud.com/jobs. Just do it. Just apply. It's great here. You get to work with us. Kevin's been here for 9 years. What kind of endorsement do you need besides that?
Yeah, can be a long timer.
All right. See y'all next time.
Bye.
Bye.